shortly after connecting to my magic, which was in September of 2015, on October October 1st, 2015, I was actually at a marketing workshop and wasn't doing anything remotely quote unquote spiritual. And I was just listening to the speaker talk. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this giant gold body of light shows up next to me to my left. And and I had to do like a double take. And immediately my heart recognized who it was. And and I had already at that point heard of the Emerald Tablets and the Book of Thoth and things like that. So I had an idea. And I just so happened to have a cat named Thoth, which was what I discovered Thoth's way of leaving a breadcrumb trail for me of what's going to happen in my life. And I didn't know he pronounced his name Thoth. And so this gold body of light shows up, and I look at him, and I was just like, yo, you're Thoth. Like, what are you doing here? And he was like, just watch. And I was like, okay. And we're watching the speaker talk. And as I'm observing the speaker, inside myself, in a subtle way, I was also judging the speaker. And I was judging the speaker for not being authentic enough, because I saw that inside he's this really like goofy and silly kind of guy, but he was talking very monotone and just like blah blah blah. And so I was judging him. And then Thoth began to speak to me telepathically, and he was like, there's more than one way of being authentic. He may not be embodied in his soul's true personality, but he's speaking from his heart, and that's authentic. And I was just like, whoa, all right, respect. And it was like, that was a moment like, okay, cool. And then I'm like, so what are you doing here? And he's like, we're going to be working together. And that began the journey.
That began the journey. Okay. And like, so because there's been a lot that's happened since then. And over the last year, you had or maybe longer than that, you had kind of stepped away from that, like going to trance. Can you share a little bit more about like kind of what that journey was like?
The stepping away part.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so because you started trance channeling
Right.
Thoth.
Yeah.
And at what point did you understand your relationship?
It was definitely over time. I don't really remember when it happened specifically, because it was kind of like puzzle pieces were dropping in bit by bit
Totally.
the more that I harmonized with his frequency. So this is in 2015, and then it was around 2021 that I, let's just say, graduated from the way that I was working with him. And it was a really, working with Thoth was both an incredibly magical, life-changing, next level of whoa kind of journey, and it was extremely challenging. He would trigger the shit out of me. And because what people often experience is the channel. You ask a question, you get a response. And so they're just like, whoa, wisdom changes my life, cool. What they don't often experience yet is the relationship, because there's a very real relationship that happens, as you know. And the relationship at times was very challenging. He very much represented to me the divine masculine. And where I had a lot of wounding was around with my father. And there were certain ways in which Thoth reminded me of my father, but a better version, a purer version. And so he would definitely surface a lot of my triggers and wounds, and just help me move through them with the utmost unconditional love. And so at some point, a big part of our training around 2020 is he started to train me in not going. So what used to happen is I would go into trance and I would allow his energy in, and it kind of felt like I would go into the back seat of the car of my consciousness, and then he would take the steering wheel and speak through me. And at some point he started to tell me, he's like, don't go in the back seat. He's like, when you feel my energy come in, he's like, remain present. And it was challenging because it just felt so good to let go. It just felt like, getting almost like intoxicating, you know?
I get it.
And, and he kept saying to me, he's like, remain in your energy. He's like, something's trying to happen here. He's like, instead of going into the trance, he's like, just allow me to appear through you. The more natural you are, the more naturally I can express myself through you. And so I started to play with this idea. And then finally, at some point, I managed to train myself to, well, what I would first do is I would, before going into trance and going to the channeling state, is I would just feel my core vibration. I would sit and feel my body and my core vibration and stimulate it and anchor it. And then so as soon as he would start to come in, I wouldn't lose track of that. I would remain powerful with him, so to speak. And then through doing that, a certain merge happened where there was a kind of divine union, if you want to call it that, where from that point forward, I no longer needed to go into trance state. I would just effortlessly shift between David and Thoth. And I didn't care if people knew who the messenger was as long as they get the message. Right. And so through that, at some point, that just elevated my vibration to a new peak. And then at some point, there was just this graduation where I no longer needed to channel him in that way anymore. And I started to learn new things, and I stopped working with spirit guides for a period of time and other beings. And I simply got to a space where I was able to allow source to move through me instead of needing to tune into anything.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how the evolution looked. And now it seems like another chapter starting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we've talked about that like in our own conversations, but can you share more about what the new chapter is?
Totally. So I thought my journey with Thoth was done. And, it was just, it felt like a graduation. It felt like a completion. And it was kind of like, cool, you graduated. Now you're just pure beingness, basically. You don't need to channel other beings. Um, in fact, one of the messages I kept getting was, or the message that came through me was, I no longer channel other beings. I only channel love, which I didn't recognize was a coded message, because it doesn't mean that other beings are not love, but it was a coded message in the sense that other beings, meaning I don't need to plug into other beings and use their gifts and abilities. I can step into the love of myself and allow for my own magic to come through without needing to use their gifts and abilities. And if they want to work in concert with me, that's perfectly cool too. But I'm
Mhm.
not using them anymore. They're not my training wheels. And so yeah, so I thought I was done with Thoth. And then months had gone by. Pretty much actually a year had gone by since my last interaction with him. And then recently, about a week or so ago, right the day that we spoke, I was very randomly on a, well, I was on a conversation with my friend O, and we were just talking about all kinds of things, and it was a very expansive and heart-opening conversation. And we weren't talking about anything Thoth at all. And then out of nowhere, at some point, again, my vibration started to hit this peak. And then suddenly I started to feel Thoth's energy just come in so strong. And I hadn't felt that in so long. And it was a little intimidating and off-putting. And I even got scared because I'm like, no, I thought I was done with this. And in hindsight, I guess those fears came from the wound that it triggered of my father leaving. And so when Thoth was no longer in my life, it kind of felt like I had to make peace with my father figure leaving. And so when he came back, it just started to there was wounds coming up of like, oh, well, what are you doing back? You're just going to leave again. And I had to work through that, and you and I spoke about that. It was very triggering for me. And he mentioned that he was interested in what I'm creating, the art of true transformation, where I'm going to be showing other people how to transform lives in a powerful way. And yeah, I'm interested in that. Let's do it. And I was like, no, this is my thing. Like, while at the same time also knowing that there's no separation between he and I. You know,
Mm.
my ego is going, this is my thing, stay out of it. But my truth knows that this is just an aspect of my higher self. This is another frequency, of my spectrum.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so I've did the exploring around that, dissolved the triggers. I brought myself through a process, and now I'm super excited to work with Thoth.